Folie à deux, often translated from French as the folly of two or the madness of two, refers to a shared delusional disorder. This may well apply to the central figures in today's disturbing tale of a married couple who seemed to thrive on the abduction, rape and murder of young women. But labelling them with a delusional disorder would conceivably give them the excuse of madness or poor mental health for the abhorrent acts they committed when they absolutely knew what they were doing. Come with me as we head down under for the twisted tale of David and Catherine Birnie. This is Murder of Crows. David Birnie was born on the 16th of February 1951, and it would be fair to say his home life and upbringing were not especially conventional. His family lived in Wattle Grove, a suburb of Perth, semi-rural to the east of the city. They attended the Wattle Grove Baptist Church. Rumours about the Birnie family were rife among the congregation and also at the school attended by the 5 Birnie siblings. These rumours suggested alcoholism, promiscuity and even incest within the family. Whether true or not, a stigma certainly followed the family throughout David Birnie's formative years. In the early 60s, with Birnie about to enter his teenage years, the family moved to another suburb, this time closer to the city. He would have some run-ins with the law in his early adolescence, and it seemed he had little respect for the rules of other people. Around this time, he would meet, through mutual friends, a girl called Catherine Harrison, who would play a major part in his future. While they didn't immediately form a relationship, both of their futures would seem to see the two constantly drawn to one another, with them first starting a relationship when both were around 14 years of age. Catherine was also born in 1951, on the 23rd of May to be exact. When she was just 2 years old, her mother Doreen died giving birth to her brother, who also sadly died 2 days later. Her father, Harold, worried about trying to cope with a baby girl on his own, gave up custody to Doreen's parents, so Catherine's maternal grandparents. She lived with them until the age of 10, and little is known about this period in her life. But at the age of 10, there was a custody battle between the grandparents and Catherine's father, Harold, who now felt he was in a position to be able to care for his daughter again. It was through this that Harold regained sole custody of Catherine, and she returned to live with him. So there were periods of upheaval in young Catherine Harrison's life, but nothing that would give major cause for concern. But a cause for concern for Harold came when Catherine started a relationship with David Birnie, when both were around 14. Unsurprisingly, her association with Birnie led to issues with the police, and she would have periods in detention throughout her teenage years, and Harold would continually try to persuade Catherine to separate from Birnie. Now, back with the Birnie family, the Birnie family would never eat together, and one imagines that the earlier rumours would have had some basis in fact. So it would seem that the Birnie children would most likely not have had secure attachments. And as we will see, David Birnie would go on to have an obsession with sex as he grew into an adult. But the first big event in David Birnie's life, which would see him leave home at 15, would be his decision to leave school and become an apprentice jockey at the nearby Ascot racecourse. It would be here that his predilections would first become apparent. He was allegedly cruel to the horses that he was helping to care for, and he would also show signs of being an exhibitionist. In fact, at the boarding house he was living in for his training as an apprentice jockey, he entered the room of an elderly woman who was also living there. And on entering the room, he was naked apart from wearing stockings on his head, and he tried to rape the poor women. He was obviously growing into an adult whose own needs were the only ones that mattered. This would lead to periods in and out of prison as he developed into an adult with paraphilia and an obsession with porn. Now, Harold Harrison's disapproval of Catherine's relationship with David Birnie would initially push the two closer together as teenage rebellion would suggest. But her periods in detention would allow other voices to influence the young miscreant, and a parole officer convinced her to try employment away from home to step away from David Birnie's influence. With this in mind, Catherine began working as a housekeeper for the McLaughlin family. and in 1971, on her 21st birthday, she married Donald McLaughlin. Around this time, in 1972 in fact, David Birnie married his first wife, Kerry. The couple had a daughter called Tanya in 1976. They were married for around a decade, with the marriage ending in 1982. Catherine McLaughlin similarly settled into family life and, in fact, had 7 children over the course of their marriage, although tragically her firstborn child, who was a son, was killed in infancy as the result of a traffic accident. Catherine and Donald McLaughlin were together for 14 years. Now, by 1985, David Birnie was working in a wrecker's yard in Willagee. It seems that it would have been around this time that he became reacquainted with Catherine sometime during this year, and his hold over her seemed to be as strong as ever. Quite what force pulled her towards David is unclear, but it was remarkably powerful, as Catherine left her husband and 6 children to move in with David Birnie at 3 Morehouse Street in Willagee. David and Catherine never actually married, but Catherine actually changed her surname to Birnie by deed poll. It was clearly a poisonous partnership, as by the following year, 1986, the couple would be ready to travel down an evil and vicious road that would see several abductions and murders carried out over just 5 weeks. In early October of 1986, Mary Nielsen, who was a psychology student at the University of Western Australia, well, she would earn extra money by working a few hours in a delicatessen. So with money being tight, she was on the lookout for cut price tyres for her car, and as a result visited the wrecking yard that David Birnie was working at. Now, sensing an opportunity, Birnie said that he could do her a better deal on tyres if he liaised with her from home, and he gave her his phone number to set up a meeting and do the deal. She visited Birnie at home to get the cheap tyres, and at that point she was prevented from leaving the house. She was bound and gagged and then chained to the bed in Birnie's bedroom. She was raped multiple times by David Birnie as Catherine watched. Once they were done, it seemed that Mary had served her purpose. So they took her to Gleneagle, near the Albany Highway at Bedford Vale. She was raped again before Birnie strangled the girl with a nylon cord. From somewhere in his dubious reading materials, Birnie believed that open wounds would speed up decomposition. So he stabbed her in the chest before the poor girl was buried in a shallow grave. Mary Nielsen would have received her psychology degree the following year, but obviously that would never happen. 2 weeks later, around the 20th of October, the Birnies went looking for another victim. They cruised the streets for hours and hours until they came upon Susanna Candy hitchhiking on the Stirling Highway in Claremont. After picking up the blissfully unaware 15-year-old, she was held at knife point while her hands were tied together. The Hollywood senior high school student, who lived with her family in the Netherlands area, was taken back to the Morehouse Street property, where she was forced to write letters assuring her family that she was fine. After this, she was chained to the bed and repeatedly assaulted. When Birnie was done, Catherine actually got into bed with them, since she now knew that David Birnie particularly liked this. The pair then both assaulted the teenager, but when David Birnie attempted to strangle the girl with a nylon cord, she became hysterical and borderline uncontrollable. In an effort to regain control of the girl, the twisted couple forced sleeping pills down her throat, and she soon became drowsy and eventually fell asleep. With the girl now making an easy target, David Birnie asked Catherine to prove her love for him by performing the killing action this time. She duly did as she was asked, and later said, "I was prepared to follow him to the end of the earth and would do anything to see that his desires were satisfied." Ew, ew, ew. Welcome to the freak show. Arrgh. They buried the poor girl near the grave of Mary Nielsen in the state forest. It was with their next victim, Nolene Patterson, that cracks in the Birnie partnership started to become evident. Patterson was the bar manager at the Netherlands Golf Club and was heading home from work on the 1st of November 1986 when she ran out of fuel, leaving her stranded on the Canning Highway. Being the good eggs that they were, the Birnies stopped to help. As before, once inside the car, Nolene was held at knife point and taken to the Morehouse Street home in Willagee. After she had been chained to the bed and raped, their usual MO would have been to murder and bury the woman the same night. But Nolene Patterson was held hostage for 3 days, with Catherine Birnie believing that David was developing an emotional attachment to the poor defenseless woman. In a jealous tirade, Catherine insisted that David murder Nolene immediately or Catherine would kill herself. Oh, trouble in paradise. Anyway, David drugged Nolene and then strangled her while she slept. She was then taken to their now usual burial ground, but Patterson was buried away from the previous two victims. And it is believed that Catherine took great pleasure in covering Nolene's face with sand. She was clearly batshit crazy, so nothing about either of these two butt nuggets surprises me at this point. On the 5th of November, the crazy couple committed their final known murder. They picked up Denise Brown as she waited for a bus on Stirling Highway. As with their usual MO, the 21-year-old was held at knife point and taken to the Morehouse Street property, where she was chained up and raped repeatedly. The poor girl was then taken to the Wanneroo Pine plantation, and while waiting for darkness to fall, David Birnie raped the woman again in the car. Well, you got to kill the time somehow, I suppose. After dragging her from the car, it seems that David Birnie was in a rapey mood again, so assaulted the woman yet again. But this time, while doing so, he stabbed her in the neck at the same time. She was then dumped in a shallow grave, where she promptly sat up. Presumably at this point, David Birnie absolutely shit his pants before taking an axe to the poor tragic woman and dispatching her with 2 blows to the head. They then completed the burial process. It was with their next abductee that things went awry for Mr. and Mrs. Crazy Town. On the 9th of November, and it's worth noting here that in line with other serial killer escalations, the gap between victims was becoming less each time, 17-year-old Kate Moore accepted a lift from the Birnies. She actually asked the couple, as they held her at knife point, if they were going to rape her or kill her. And she was told, "We'll only rape you if you're good." David Birnie, master of the one-line chat-up game there. Kate was forced to call her mother, and in a spark of genius, she told her mother that she had had too much to drink and was staying with a friend, and she hoped that her mother would know, with Kate not being a drinker, that something was amiss. But seemingly this didn't happen, but it was very clever of her, I gotta say. She was chained to the bed and raped as per the MO, and for some reason she was not killed that night, and when David went to work the next morning, Catherine had forgotten to chain Kate back to the bed. So while Catherine went to the door to carry out a drug deal, always good to mix up your offending behaviour, Kate broke a lock on a window and jumped. She hit her head on the concrete floor, but kept her wits about her enough to stagger away from the home and go towards the neighbouring houses. After finding no answer at a couple of houses and still somewhat disorientated from the bump to the head, she jumped over a gate and found herself back in the Birnies' yard, where she was set upon by David's dog. Talk about adding insult to injury there. But she kept moving and soon found herself in a vacuum cleaner shop. She was dressed only in a singlet and leggings and pleaded with the staff to call the police because she had been raped. The police were duly called, and Kate began telling her story to the police. The police were initially doubtful about what had happened to her, but due to the incredible detail of her story, a young police constable called Laura Hancock was absolutely convinced from the word go about her account, just down to the sheer amount of detail she was talking about. So while the Birnies had used aliases, so evidently they must have been concerned on some level about her escaping, Kate had actually seen David's name on a medicine bottle, and she was also able to provide an address and a phone number. She stated that they had watched the film Rocky on VHS, and the pièce de résistance, which makes Kate an absolute star in my eyes, was that Kate had hidden a drawing she had done in the house, and if they went and searched the property, they would find the drawing, which in turn would prove she was telling the truth. When the property was searched, they found Kate's drawing and also found a copy of Rocky in the video player in the home, and the Birnies were then arrested. Under questioning, the couple gave differing accounts. Catherine denied any knowledge of Kate or who she was, while David said that Kate had come to their home for consensual sex. Despite their stories, David was ultimately persuaded to confess by Sergeant Vince Catich, whereupon he also gave the locations of the 4 grave sites. At the subsequent trial, David Birnie pled guilty to 4 counts of murder and 1 count each of abduction and rape. When asked why he pled guilty, he is quoted as saying, when referring to the families, "It's the least I could do." No, David, the least you could have done was not to have raped and killed innocent women. But anyway, having been found sane and capable of being tried, Catherine also faced legal proceedings and was found guilty of 4 counts of murder. Both Birnies were handed 4 life sentences and would be required to serve at least 20 years before any eligibility for parole. David Birnie was sent to Fremantle Prison, where he was ultimately placed in solitary confinement for his own protection from other prisoners. He was actually housed in the former death row cells after their conversion to solitary confinement cells, solitary protection cells. He remained in these cells until the prison closed in 1991. After transfer to Casuarina prison, he was again kept in protective cells. He whinged and complained about poor treatment, because of course he did, and said that keeping him apart from Catherine was designed to send them into mental breakdown. Oh, poor Davy! But it seems that a lack of antidepressants led to his depression worsening. His computer, he had a bloody computer? Fuck my life. Anyway, his computer was confiscated after, guess what? They found pornographic software on it. He was also accused of sexually assaulting another prisoner. As a combined result of these difficulties, David Birnie committed suicide by hanging himself with a cord from an air vent. The 54-year-old's body was found on the 7th of October 2005. David Birnie's daughter Tanya, who went on to change her surname to avoid any association with David, was just 10 years old when her father was arrested. Now in her 40s, she has avoided having relationships and moreover having children, as she doesn't want to spawn another David Birnie. So, in her own way, Tanya also received a mental life sentence as a result of her father's deplorable actions. Catherine Birnie, meanwhile, was sent to Bandy Up Women's Prison, where she remains to this day. She exchanged more than 2,600 letters with David while in prison, but this was the only form of contact that they were permitted. Her first husband died in 1999, and as we've discussed, David killed himself in 2005, and she was not allowed to attend either funeral. She has been a prison librarian and actually appeared in prison productions. Well, she's always seemed like a drama queen to me. By 2016, she had been denied parole 4 times, even though she had never actually applied for parole. This prompted Kate Moore, the Birnies' surviving victim, to begin a campaign to stop a process that put prisoners automatically up for parole every 3 years after their earliest release date has passed. And this campaign was supported by one of Catherine's own sons, who was using the alias Peter. And Peter actually wanted his mother to be executed. 2 consecutive Western Australia Attorneys General have stated that Catherine Birnie would not be released while they were in office. In fact, in 2009, the incumbent of that office, Christian Porter, determined that she would remain in prison for the remainder of her life, with her file being marked never to be released. She was the third Australian woman to have her file marked in this way, following Catherine Knight and Patricia Byers. The Birnie murders are also known as the Morehouse murders, from the 3 Morehouse Street address in Wallagy that the murders were committed in. I have avoided using this particular name as I do not want these 2 fuckwits in any way being confused with the absolute legend that is British Olympic swimming icon Adrian Morehouse. I stress, no Adrian Morehouses were harmed in my telling of this story. Okay? So there we have the tale of the Birnies, or as I prefer to think of them, Mr. and Mrs. Batshit-Cockwomble, who in the space of just 5 weeks left 4 women dead and another mentally traumatized for life. Whether or not it was a folie à deux is up for debate, and I'd love to know what you guys think down in the comments down there. But either way, it was selfish, unimaginably cruel, and each abduction was an absolute tragedy. This video is of course dedicated to Mary Nielsen, to Susanna Candy, to Nolene Patterson, to Denise Brown, and to Kate Moore, and anyone else like David Birnie's daughter Tanya and Catherine Birnie's son Peter, both of whose lives have been greatly affected by what these creatures did. Thank you for watching another episode of Murder of Crows. I'm Steve. This here is Samson. And we'll see you when we see you.